I'm not a Jamaican myself, but I have studied Jamaican history for quite a while, and I've been living in Jamaica for the last 6 years. I'm making this video to tell you a story of how exactly Jamaica became independent, and I hope the information I'm going to share will be useful for people who are traveling to Jamaica, or maybe want to live in Jamaica, or maybe are Jamaicans. By the end of 1950s, there was growing excitement, and Jamaica was attracting much international attention as it was to become the first island of the British West Indies to gain independence. It was confident, well-prepared, and full of hope. The island was the pearl of the Caribbean, making astonishing advances to become the fastest-growing economy in the developing world. The date for independence was set for the 6th of August 1962. But the road to independence began several hundred years earlier. When we talk about Jamaican independence, the picture presented by traditional historians is of a colony united under the British rule, moving gradually into 1940s towards self-governing and finally to independence. In reality, the division and separation were the key words, because there were no collective memories, no common language, no common culture, no sense of a community for people who had shared the same soil for years. There is a tremendous difference between living in a place and belonging to that place. Independence is not about some country with borders. It's about people's identity and culture. The feeling that your own life and your destiny is bound with the life and destiny of this place. But the problem was, for several hundred years, the term Jamaica didn't mean home to anyone. The majority of people were either from Africa or from Europe. The Europeans considered England as their home, and Jamaica was just a foreign place which they could exploit to make money. For Africans, Jamaica wasn't home either. It was a plantation, a place from which to escape. So at that time, Jamaica was little more than just a name on a map. That is why the events that happened from the end of 1920s can be viewed as nothing short of a miracle. Within less than 50 years, a place that had no identity and was home to no one turned into one of the most vibrant cultures that made an influence on the whole world, with its lifestyle, Rastafari movement, language, dancing, ska, reggae, rap, dancehall music, and before Jamaicans could make any steps towards independence, the first thing they had to do was to fight for their freedom. The first invaders of Jamaica were the Spanish back in 1494. They enslaved people of Jamaica, who were at that time Taino Indians, and put them to work to mine for gold. In 1511, the first African slaves were already brought to Jamaica, so from those times, the fight for freedom began. By 1513, some African slaves managed to escape into the inaccessible, thickly wooded mountains across the island. They became known as mountain Maroons, and most were descendants from Caramanti warriors from Ghana. They set up remote enclaves, and they were joined by the Taino, and together they managed to protect themselves and fight the Spanish. Jamaica had already been a Spanish colony for 161 years before the English stepped into the picture in 1655. Immediately after conquest by the English, the island was governed by military law. Jamaica was a struggling economy, but the potential for agriculture was soon realized, and sugar and slavery became a perfect fit. By 1670, there were 60 sugar estates and 10,000 slaves. Jamaica would become the most important British colony and the largest producer of sugar in the world. Jamaica was also considered the most rebellious slave colony in the Western Hemisphere, and there were several violent slave rebellions. The Maroons in the mountains were skilled in guerrilla warfare and were a constant threat to the British settlers, who lived in fear of ambush and raids. The First Maroon War was in 1690, and eventually a peace treaty was signed in 1739. The Maroons were given land and some autonomy in handling their affairs, and were exempt from paying taxes. And this could have been something to celebrate, if not for the fact that their freedom came with a heavy price. The Maroons were to seize all hostilities, help defend the island if it came under the attack, and to aid in the capture of runaway slaves, for which they were paid a reward. The treaty was a severe setback for the plantation slaves. No longer did the mountains represent freedom or the Maroon enclave refuge. On August 1, 1834, slavery was abolished and all slaves in the British Empire, including slaves at sea, became apprentices. Jamaica, from the empire's point of view, had passed its prime. Sugar was no longer king, and slave uprisings were all too frequent. But it was not until 1838, at the end of apprenticeship, that the last ties between slave and master were cut. This is when all men were free. But free didn't mean equal. Society, as in plantation times, fell into three classes, differentiated by race, color, education, and means: the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class. By the end of the 19th century, the island was still under oppressive rule by the colonial government, which proved indifferent to the growing unemployment, poverty, and discontent among the people. The judicial system was biased, taxes were high, and wages were low. A series of protests started in St. Thomas in 1865, led by Paul Bogle and George William Gordon, but unfortunately it turned into a violent massacre, known as the Moreton Bay Rebellion. The final conflict between African Jamaica and Britain began in the 1920s with the birth of the national consciousness. The founders of the Jamaican nation are Marcus Garvey, Alexander Bustamante, and Norman Manley. I should note here that there are various controversies surrounding these leaders. However, there is also an undeniable fact that they were the key figures in the 20th century to contribute to Jamaican independence. Marcus Garvey made the liberation call to African Jamaicans to find their racial identity, self-pride, and self-worth, and to claiming their African heritage. He broke new grounds by founding a political party to contest the election of 1930 and by publishing a political program. His election message was not forgotten. My opponents say, I am against white and fair-skinned people. This is not so. I am against the class system here, which keeps the poor men down, and the poor mostly black people. It is only natural, therefore, that their interest should be nearest and dearest to my heart. Marcus Garvey also had a significant influence on Rastafari movement that originated among Afro-Jamaican communities in 1930s. Its Afrocentric ideology and Back to Africa movement was largely a reaction against then dominant British colonial rule. At the same time, Norman Manley would address the issue of the lack of Jamaican identity as a whole by explaining that no amount of economic good will make Jamaican people a real unity. To these messages, Alexander Bustamante added a direct and powerful call to the great mass of the African Jamaican people for a better life here, in a country where they were the majority, but from whose society they had been excluded. These messages covered the primary requirements for transforming the colony Jamaica into both nation and homeland. Then the three stages of action followed. The first phase of the movement towards self-government and independence included the launching of People's National Party in 1938. In this phase, Bustamante concentrated on organizing labor as a political force and made what history may come to regard as his greatest contribution to democracy in Jamaica, the creation of Jamaica Labour Party in 1943, which led to the establishment of the two-party system in Jamaica that is present until this day. As a result of political movement in Jamaica and the increasing pressure from within Jamaica, the British government granted a constitution on 20th of November 1944, which provided for universal adult suffrage. Just to make it clear, prior to that, the right to vote was determined by the amount of wealth or property a man held, and women were not allowed to vote at all. The new system extended voting rights to adults irrespective of their race, sex, or social class. And obviously, this was a major step towards independence. Jamaica's first general election took place in December 1944. The result was a victory for the Jamaican Labour Party, which won 22 of the 32 seats. The second phase began with Manly motion in cooperation with the JLP government for the introduction of a ministerial system. By 1953, under the new system, Alexander Bustamante became Jamaica's first chief minister. He was succeeded by Norman Manley in 1955 when the PNP won the general election for the first time. Constitutionally, the next advance in self-government came in 1957 with the third stage, when the Executive Council, over which the governor presided, gave way to a cabinet, at that time called the Council of Ministers. This way, in 1958, Jamaica became an independent country in all internal matters, while the only things reserved for the Queen were defense force and international affairs. Most Caribbean countries remained under colonial rule after the abolition of slavery. Between 1958 and 1962, most of the British-controlled Caribbean was integrated as the new West Indies Federation in an attempt to create a single unified future independent state. The West Indies Federation fell apart when the largest island, Jamaica, withdrew from the federation and declared itself independent. A small delegation, including Manley and Bustamante, traveled to London to settle details for a suitable draft of the Constitution.
This independence conference marks the beginning of the end of a very long road which started over 300 years ago.
Once the official date for independence was set for August 6, 1962, there were just 2 short months to elect the political party and leader who would take Jamaica into independence. There was heavy campaigning, and the JLP won, with Bustamante stepping into the role of Jamaica's first Prime Minister of the newly independent island nation. Although disappointed at not being the one to lead the country into independence, Norman Manley played a very important role in carefully drafting the new constitution. The official ceremony was held at the new National Stadium in Kingston and was attended by over 30,000 people, with Princess Margaret officiating as the Queen's representative. By that moment, Jamaica had been in the possession as a colony of Europeans, Spanish and British combined, for a total of 468 years. At midnight, all the lights went out, and the British flag, symbolic of the British rule, was lowered in silence. And the new Jamaican flag was raised for the first time. Jamaica was in high spirits, and there were celebrations with costumed street parades and dances across the island, as well as fishermen regattas at every beach. The festivities lasted for 2 weeks. 5 months later, the last colonial governor stepped down, and Jamaican-born Sir Clifford Campbell was appointed Governor-General. With the final military parade, the British troops left, and the Jamaica Regiment took over. Soon after the festivities, it was straight into the business of nation-building from scratch. Great strides were made in industrialization, tourism, sports, shipping, telecommunication, mining, commerce, energy, foreign trade, export promotion, and investment. Jamaican Defense Force was formed, and the Made in Jamaica initiative was also introduced. It was an exciting time, and Jamaica had become a role model for developing countries, and continued to develop at a fast pace. The current Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, is the youngest in Jamaican history, and he is the first Prime Minister to be born after Jamaica gained independence. Independence comes only once in the nation's history, and it can be seen not as a destination, but as a road challenging Jamaicans to go out into the world and make contribution larger than one would expect from a small island. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video interesting. If so, please don't forget to share with your friends who you think might also be interested in learning a bit about Jamaican history. And to all of my Jamaican friends, congratulations on Jamaican Independence Day.